Now I request Krishna Sarma, the Managing Partner Corporate Law Group, request her to just come on the stage for further discussions with their panelists. Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Good morning. May I request the panelists to come on the stage? Thomas Cueni, Director General, International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Association, Geneva. Mr. Vignesh Shivnath, Director, Business Development and Alliance Management, Dr. Reddy's Lab. Thomas's name is not here. Could there be one chair missing? I can actually stand here. That's not a problem. If I can get Thomas's placard. It's here? Yeah. Okay. No worries. Yeah. No worries. I'll stand. No issue. Can I invite Jasdeep Singh Sood, Senior Vice President, Jubilant Pharma and President Generics. Mr. Rajinder Suri, CEO, Developing Countries Vaccines Manufacturers. And last but not, Mr. Sudharshan Jain, International Generics and Biosimilar Medicines Association, IGPA.
How are you, my friend?
So today's panel discussion, addressing pandemics through partnerships, is being held right after the conclusion of the 13th WTO Ministerial at Abu Dhabi on the wee hours of March 2nd, 2024, yesterday. The ministerial declaration at para 22 took note of the work done in relevant WTO councils and committees and encouraged relevant WTO bodies to continue to review and build on all the lessons learned and challenges experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic and to build effective solutions in case of future pandemics in an expeditious manner. So that's a great segue to a discussion today, because the unprecedented nature and scale of the pandemic affirmed the importance of the following, which we hope to discuss at this panel today. First, that the innovation ecosystem was critical for finding new cures. A large number of projects were initiated in a remarkably short time during the initial months of the pandemics, indicating innovation and risk-taking at all levels and in the entire value chain. In vaccines, for example, there were 462 in preclinical developments and 5 made it to the market, and for therapeutics drugs, 18 out of the 900 made it to the market. So 75% of this investment has been made at risk by private sector, both innovative and generic pharmaceutical companies. The second, it also put the spotlight on partnerships, which is the subject matter of discussion today, and it covered all parts of the value chain. Partnerships established between established biopharmaceutical companies, small biotech companies, research and academic institutions, and downstream in the supply chain arrangements and manufacturing agreements. The Airfinity data further shows that over 450 voluntary collaborations, 177 in therapeutics alone, are in place to support the global supply of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. Now, most of these VLs, voluntary licenses, were in India, China, South Africa, South Korea, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And these collaborations were voluntary, varied, and dynamic. And then I come to the third point that we want to discuss today, which is that most of these manufacturing partnerships for therapeutics and vaccines were signed in parallel or prior to companies seeking regulatory approval or emergency authorizations. Now this puts the focus on the important discussions that I hope our panelists are going to kind of make points around regulatory conversions, securing supply chains, removing export restrictions and trade facilitations. So today what we will do is that I will put questions to our colleagues. First, to Thomas, to talk a little bit about, what was the initial reaction of the, innovative industry when the pandemic first broke, the early days, which will set the tone for the discussion. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Krishna, and thanks a lot for inviting me to come back to Delhi. I've been last time in India actually in October 2022, a host of the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers meeting in Pune, which is important in terms of lessons learned. When we were confronted with SARS-CoV-2, with COVID, back in February 2020, we realized that SARS-CoV-2 was something different. The reaction actually from us, from our leadership, was early on, this requires business not as usual. This is so extraordinary, and even before we had, the scaring stories about people dying in Bergamo in Italy. This was not Ebola somewhere far away in an African country where you could argue that the issue was fragile healthcare systems, ineffective healthcare systems. It was close to the heart of the industrialized world. We said this is business not as usual. And it means that we need to join forces, we need to act. And when I look in terms of lessons learned, one of my concerns right now is that the global world discussing right now the future of pandemic preparedness and response in Geneva will not focus primarily on what did not work well. And what did not work well was the equitable rollout of the vaccines, treatments and tests in 21 in particular. That's what we need to fix, but we need to preserve what worked extremely well, namely access to pathogens and the genetic sequences was unquestioned, namely innovation in science delivered. We had, before COVID, the fastest vaccine ever developed took 4 years. It was against Ebola. 4 years, and global vaccine manufacturing capacity before COVID was 5 billion doses per year. And we knew relatively early on that we would need at least two doses, jabs, per person, which meant we needed more than 10 billion vaccines. We needed to treble the vaccine capacity. And this worked, and it worked because we benefited from decades of science. Now, I represent the big global innovative companies from the US, Japan, and Europe. Today, everybody thinks mRNA, that's the magic formula. Now, when you think about it, 3 of the largest vaccine manufacturers in the world, pre-COVID, the innovative, they flopped. Now, some of my colleagues say we weren't able to come up with the vaccine at the speed and time required, but actually they were not there. And those who were most relevant were pretty much unknown, had never earned any money, didn't have any sales, were several $100 million or euro in the red on their balance sheets, but it worked. I think one of the, clearly, since we just had this fabulous panel about women in health, one of the heroines in terms of mRNA vaccines, Catalina Carico, who was awarded the Nobel Award for her contribution in October last year. She actually was dismissed from her US university in Pennsylvania back in 2013 because the academics, the leaders of the university said, your work does not meet the high standards we are expect from faculty members. Shame on them. We also actually had quite a few other women in terms of the early fight against COVID. I recall Dr. Ngozi, for example. I just came from Abu Dhabi, the WTO conference. She was one of the earliest who called out against export restrictions, open borders. And also Dr. Soumya Swaminathan in Geneva, at that time the Chief Science Officer of WHO. And I mentioned that because I think one of the elements, the third element, which really worked was partnership. And I think that's the theme of today. I did not really know the developing country vaccine manufacturers at that time. And Rajinder Suri was not yet the CEO of the DCVMN. Over the last 3 years, we really worked together, hand in hand. We joined forces. I knew Sudharshan, but from his time at Abbott, before he became the Secretary General of IGBA. But we have seen partnerships of an unprecedented number and scale, and many of them really fast. And that's why I'm so pleased we do not have one of my member companies here, but we have partners from IFPMA member companies, and we partnered on a large scale with the DCVMN in terms of the framework. And I'm really looking forward to talk about what does it need to make sure that next time that we are not caught as ill-prepared, where, the richest country in the world found out they didn't have enough masks, they didn't have the personal protective equipment for the doctors, their hospitals were overwhelmed, and of course, we didn't have the vaccines, tests, and treatments yet. But all of them came, and more than once during meetings with WHO, either Rajinder or Sai Prasad from DCMN, when I had to remind WHO, who made it look as if all these vaccines, tests, and treatments had been developed by WHO scientists in WHO labs and sort of manufactured in WHO plants. And I said, give me a break. All of that was done by private companies, in private labs, and in private, whether from developing countries or industrialized countries. But what was really new, and I think that's something we should preserve, was this sense of we are in there in one team, which worked extremely well in COVAX. We know the shortcomings, which we have to address next time, but we also were faced with some challenges in the regulatory field, which prevented patients getting access to treatments. But with that, Krishna?
So we'll take that in the second round. I have pretty much the same questions actually to each of the panelists. If you could take about 5 minutes to kind of talk about it. So I invite Vignesh Shivnath, Director, Business Development, Dr. Reddy's Lab. Can you talk a little bit about, Dr. Reddy's have entered into several voluntary licenses for therapeutics with several partners. Could you talk about your experience as to how it worked? Because it's quite complex if you look from outside in. Thank you.
Thank you. So, can you hear me? Yeah. So, Dr. Reddy's from a COVID perspective had a lot of partnerships with the vaccine with the vaccine innovators, and also from a therapeutic space. We were there starting from a hand sanitizer, and we went on till the Pfizer molecule, which was the latest one in the therapeutic space, and the vaccine we partnered to bring Sputnik to India with the RDIF. What really worked for Dr. Reddy's as a company is early partnership. Early partnership with the innovators. Like, we didn't wait for the data to come up, though there was a strong clinical, regulatory, and a medical review of all the therapies. But before the drug was approved by any of the regulators, we believed in the science which was there behind the molecule, and we partnered early. As a generic manufacturers, the strength that we portray is basically affordability and availability of the therapy or vaccine to the patients. So we worked on that skill. Partnering early gave us almost a parallel development to when the innovator molecules was approved in much more of a mature regulatory markets like FDA of the US and Europe. We were ready with the molecule for India first, and then obviously the the other markets where the access of the medicine was important. So this is one of the key factors for our success, which was early partnership. The number two aspect was also an innovative clinical regulatory pathway that we as a company absorb, especially in the case of molnupiravir, which was the Merck molecule. There was first time probably by the DCGI that there was a joint clinical trial which was approved by 5 to 6 companies. So we were all license holders of Merck. There were about 6 to 7 generic companies that had the license for molnupiravir. All the 6 came together as a collaboration, and we approached the DCGI in terms of accessing the medicine quickly, that we all perform only one clinical trial, which was required by the DCGI or the SEC committee at that moment of time. So we led that collaboration, which in general reduced the cost for all the generic manufacturers to make this drug available, and then which also enhanced the access to the patient, because running 6 clinical trials and running one clinical trial, it was faster. So these are the 2 key aspects that worked for us, and especially the third key aspect as a generic manufacturers, what technology transfer. This really worked with all the partners, and especially with remdesivir and molnupiravir, where the innovators were Gilead and Merck, and they were willing to tech transfer their product to our manufacturing side, and we were one of the largest suppliers, not the largest, but one of the many of the largest suppliers for both the drugs available to India and also to the globe where it was necessary. So these were the 3 key aspects that had success, at least for Dr. Reddy's and the generic manufacturers in India, where we could able to provide access to the medicine for the patients earlier and of the same quality of that of the innovator which is available in the Western world. So that was the key 3 success factors for us.
So thank you so much. Vignesh, how do you think that intellectual property structures helped in both the aspects? The aspect of, the IP itself, and second is the tech transfer and the regulatory hand holding that you said that the innovator company did with you. Could you just put a little light on it?
Sure. So as a generic manufacturer, we were part of the voluntary license play, where we probably have an IP waiver from the innovator that to make this very important medicine available to patients. We had an IP waiver from the innovator through various partnerships, either through direct partnerships or through the medicines patent pool, and they had also taken special approval to give us the IP waiver, where IP
that was the Pfizer's
the Pfizer, yes. So in a way, IP was waived for us, which gave us rights to use the technology which was used by the innovator to make this available in most of the markets where the drug was in need for the patients. And also what really helped for us is the innovators being part of our pre-submission meetings with the regulators, because the clinical package of the drug is available with the innovators. We as generic manufacturers were not deeply involved in the clinical story of the drug. So the innovators were open to work with us during a pre-submission meetings with the various regulators, where they would share all the clinical package to the regulators, and it would prove our equivalence with the innovators, so that we are not far away from the quality from an in vitro perspective. But the clinical package was shared, which really helped us to gain confidence of the regulators that both the drugs are more or less same, which helped us take quick approvals from the regulators. So this also helped.
Thank you, Vignesh. So as you can see, IP can be an enabler for these structures to actually, work and operate. Thank you. Can I now go to Jasdeep Singh Sood of Jubilant? Jasdeep, can you kind of explain a little bit about your, experiences with remdesivir when you started out in 2020? Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me on the forum here, and my congratulations to Modi Prix Galien India Forum. I think this is an inaugural session, and I think you're doing a very fine job by keeping this topic in debate, in discussion after 2 years of pandemic. And my all the best to the team for future forums that you would have. So thank you for having this. Experience with remdesivir, honestly, everybody sitting on this side or who have been part of these voluntary licenses or part of the industry during this, they all can write possibly a book on it. And that's what my intent is, that when I retire, maybe I have an alternate career available with me to tell how to do and what to do during pandemics. But having said that, I think I'll like to start by saying that what impact actually we could make because of the voluntary license. So just to share a brief background, like this was the first voluntary license experience for Jubilant in India. We have not done that before with any partners. Gilead knew us because we have injectable facilities in US where we manufacture their products, and thereby I think they had the faith that we could do it in India. But of the 5 or 6 initial voluntary licenses that were given by Gilead to Indian companies, we were the only one which did not have a injectable manufacturing facility in India. We were the only one which did not have any presence in the injectable market, but still Gilead went ahead and gave that voluntary license. And the end result of that is we signed a voluntary license on 12th of May, and within 2.5 months, on 4th of August, we actually launched the product in the market. And the best part of it is that of the 6 voluntary licenses, all others were in the space of injectable. They had their own injectable facilities, so on and so forth, and experience behind it. We were the 3rd fastest to the market, behind the number 1 company coming into the market by just about 2 weeks. Why this experience is so special is that I think this whole pandemic showed to the world that when you come together and collaborate, what difference can you really make? So just to share that this would not have been possible. We created one of the largest capacities for remdesivir or GBR injections in the country by tying up with CMO networks to meet the demand. And you know that for remdesivir, India was the pharmacy to the world. Even for these, we supplied products to almost 127 countries across the globe. And I think what worked is both Gilead and we shared the same goal or vision, which was patient first, right? So it was not about top line, it was not about bottom line, it was not about it was not a 200-page contract. It was hardly, you would be surprised, it was hardly a 15-20-page contract for an IP to be given. So I think I give a lot of credit to Gilead. They were very flexible, allowing us the freedom to kind of ensure that we can get the product to the market as fast as possible. But I think the team worked very well. I think whether it is supply chain teams or R&D teams, the technology given to us was not complete, and our R&D people, scientists, showed the caliber that with a half-baked technology documents and limited documents, they could go ahead and kind of create the product for the market. So I think kudos to everyone. I think even government agencies, regulatory agencies, might say example that we submit a dossier or a product for registration with all the data in the world, and regulatory body takes from country to country anything between 2 years to 5 years to approve it. And here with limited data, they could approve a product which is a good product, even sells today, right? Within a matter of month. So I think it taught all of us a lesson that if we decide to move fast, it is just a matter of intent.
Yeah.
So I think an excellent experience that I had during that period. Yeah.
Thank you. And we all know what remdesivir did, during the months in 2021 when India was going through that second round, of the nightmare. Okay, now I turn to Sudharshan Jain in his hat as the International Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association. IGBA members were key partners in the voluntary licensing agreements. In your opinion, are voluntary collaborations better than mandated arrangements?
So thank you very much.
Is this working?
Thank you very much, Krishna, for moderating this session, and it is great to be with Thomas today after long years, and Thomas has been pioneer in many of these areas, so it is a pleasure indeed to be here today. IGBA and IPA has played a very important role during the pandemic time. Every day was a new day. We didn't know what is happening, and I will slightly set the context. March 23rd, we announced the pandemic in this country, and in April, May, the first repurposed drug which was told that will change the pandemic was HCQ, hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, right.
And McKinsey did a lot of study, and then the question which is there at this time when there is a crisis, although all of us talk that patient is first, but when it comes to the question of the crisis, how do you balance patient interest, company interest, national interest, and global interest? And we were caught in that crisis, Thomas, right in the month of April. And Indian government announced restriction on the supply of HCQ because of the limited work which was done. Thanks to the IPA CEOs, we used to meet every day from 10 to 10:30 in India. We used to talk to WHO every week. IGB used to talk to WHO every week. And when the restrictions were announced, although we were talking patient first, global interest important, when it comes to the reality, everyone said that, and I was representing IPA, that if something happens to India and if we are not able to supply to HCQ to India, what will happen? There will be political crisis. We presented a lot of data. And then finally, Mr. Trump talked to Modi, and we decided, and then the real call was taken, and we represented in IGBA that we have to balance global interest, national interest, and we removed the restriction on HCQ. HCQ was supplied around the world, although there have been doubts about repurposed drugs. But the question and the priority which India and IGBA set very clearly, that we have to balance national and global interest, and that is also evident. I will give you some examples. Come May, Remdesivir arrangement happened, and again, lot of collaboration between all the IGBA companies. 127 countries were supplied from India, and the pricing, which was $520 per vial in the world, we reduced the price to $10 a vial. There were 8 companies in the beginning May, but January, February, March, again the crisis happened much more. And thanks to Jubilant and my friends here, Dr. Reddy's, and the health minister, monitoring every day literally. Because when we are talking partnership, IGBA, all of us were talking partnership in action. And we increased the production from 100,000 vials to 110,000 vials every week. So Remdesivir was again a classical example, reduced the price. Because when we talk of purpose-driven organization, when we talk of shareholders' value, sometimes stakeholders' value becomes much more important. And these crises are a real opportunity to show to the world that healthcare industry can make a difference. Again, the classical example of AstraZeneca, great collaboration between AstraZeneca and Serum Institute, 2.2 billion vaccines at a price of $2. A great example. So partnerships plays very important role. Voluntary licensing plays very important role. But 2 or 3 early points I will take what Vignesh said. Partnerships at the early times instead of waiting at late, and technical collaboration also becomes very important, and let companies come together to take forward, and the patient should be the center of everything what we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sudharshan. I'll come round for the second round of questions a little later. Now I turn to vaccines. Mr. Rajinder Suri, CEO, Developing Countries Vaccines Manufacturers. May I ask you to share your experiences of the vaccine partnership that you have that have happened and are happening now, and what, according to you, were the key enablers?
Thank you very much, Krishna. When a question comes from a legal luminary, you have to be very cautious in answering. So I'll exert the maximum caution.
You know, COVID-19, before that COVID-19, I must say thanks to my friend Thomas, who not only invited me here, but he was the person who called me when I was traveling from Chandigarh to Delhi in February 2021, and it was 14th of February. So, and the very next month on 8th March, he conducted what is the first global manufacturing and supply chain meeting under Chatham House rules. So this was first time when the industry came together. So it's a big step forward, and thanks to this gentleman who brought two organizations, IFPMA and DCVMN, together, and I think we should give a big hand.
Yeah.
And thereafter, there was no looking back. We have been staying together, we have been breathing together, and till yesterday, drinking together. But
We met on 14th of Feb. That's
exactly,
Valentine's Day.
Valentine Day, absolutely. So I think what is important is that partnerships certainly helped, and if there is one reason we have to give for the successful control, I would not say eradication, but successful elimination and control of COVID-19, it is because of collaboration. And collaborations have happened almost, you have said 450 collaborations, I didn't count, but I believe my friend in Airfinity, he says, out of that around 65 to 70 collaborations happened only in India. So what we need to see is that totally we produced 13.8 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines as an industry. And Thomas doesn't like, but I have to say 60% of that came from developing country vaccine manufacturers. Now, these developing country vaccines, and I must tell you that I was in US 2 years back also and last year also, and not a single person knew any company, vaccine company's name other than Pfizer and Moderna. And then you tell them, my dear friend, 8 billion doses have been contributed by developing country vaccine manufacturers, and as Sudharshan ji said, 2.2 billion out of that came from India alone. Now this is something humongous, but this was possible because of collaborations, partnerships, and if you analyze, if you go back into the history of what these collaborations were, these were all collaborations between like-minded people. These were voluntary collaborations. They were not forced upon. And these were collaborations which were, based on the company's experience, the length of experience, the expertise of people in the companies, because they could not only absorb technology, but they could reproduce technology. And this was one of the most important aspects in the vaccine field, because wherever, whether you go to Korea or Indonesia or India or China, all experienced companies only could absorb and deliver. And the second thing which happened was the innovation. This was the first time that Indian companies came into the innovation space. And the first DNA vaccine in the whole world was developed by an Indian vaccine manufacturer. So I think a lot of good things have happened, a lot of good learnings have happened, but you asked if there were any issues. Issues as such, no, because these were voluntary collaboration. But challenges, yes. I mean, two challenges which I can list down here is, one was in terms of DPA, the Defense Production Act in US, which stopped completely all supplies of raw materials, packaging materials, whatever, to other countries. And this you have to appreciate. In a vaccine manufacturing, there is more than 100 to 200 components which are required to manufacture one vaccine. And even if one component is stopped, your entire value chain comes to a grinding halt. So this was something which was very disturbing act. But thanks to the Honorable Prime Minister's personal intervention, that things became faster for India, at least they cleared. And the second challenge was in terms of product development funding, because COVID is something which was unprecedented and required huge funding support. So let me tell you, out of $5.6 billion which were invested in product development funding for COVID-19, only 5% was given to developing country vaccine manufacturers. 95% went to innovative companies. Those who had long pockets had a lot of money, but they were supported. So I think this is one area where we need to definitely look at, because it requires reflection, it requires readjustment, and we are talking to all the funding agencies globally who really matter in that. Thank you.
Thank you. It is wonderful points to build on as I go to my next round of questions, which is really what are the lessons that we learned and what do we need to be able to address the next pandemic. And if each of the speakers, again I'll start with Thomas, can talk about the Quad emphasis on getting supply chains right, especially the over dependence on China for most of our APIs and originating material. So can I start with Thomas and take the same round? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Krishna. As you said, I think learnings from COVID, and Rajinder has already mentioned a couple of them. I don't know any CEO from a major global pharmaceutical company who does not support open borders. Because even, you mentioned the vaccines complexity, the Comirnaty from Pfizer had ingredients from 19 different countries, more than 200. If just one country falls through, you're challenged. I can give you the opposite example. PCR technology was extremely important for testing. The company Roche in Basel, they produce basically PCR with ingredients, one from the US, one from Germany, one from Switzerland. But if one country falls through, in this case the US, then you need to make a lot of calls to the White House to make them understand that without free flow of goods, it doesn't work. Therefore, I think we continue to be fully aligned, and that's why, as you said, in February 21, when we realized the shortage of the specialized glass, the syringes, the mRNA, the lipids, we did convene together with you and CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, the first ever supply chain and manufacturing summit, which led to a follow-up within WTO, and Dr. Ngozi, with her colleagues from WHO and WTO, made a very compelling call for open borders. Whether that will be changing next time round, who knows? That is why I think many countries are looking into nearshoring. I wouldn't talk about friendshoring as it's often done, but nearshoring, because you need resilient supply chains. Overall, Krishna, it was remarkable how well the supply chains within pharma held up. I had much more concerns about masks in many countries, because the biggest global manufacturer of masks was based in Wuhan, and there wasn't much coming out of Wuhan at that time. PPEs and others, there was also price gouging. In terms of lessons learned, I have to admit this was the biggest ever game-changing application of tiered pricing. I think it's worth mentioning the remdesivir licenses were all royalty-free.
Yeah.
Yes.
Second, for legal reasons, a patent holder like Gilead could not dictate the price to Jubilant or Dr. Reddy, which as a result I had friends from McKinsey with family in India who said, Thomas, my parents' lives were saved by remdesivir, but they didn't have to spend $2,500 as they would have done in Switzerland or in the US. It was about $40, which means price competition worked really well. And I think that is something for me in terms of access, lesson learned from COVID. We hopefully will see application of this radical tiered pricing beyond, just the pandemic and the crisis situation. But in terms of also fixing and addressing, and Rajinder and I have been in this together when we were in Pune, the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network joined the IFPMA Berlin Declaration, where leaders from our industry said, if there's a next pandemic, we commit to putting aside from day one, when we have products, part of our production for equitable rollout through WHO. We don't want to be the ones deciding, because we saw you had, for example, the UK Minister of Health, Secretary of Health, who when asked by the BBC, why don't you allow some of these AstraZeneca vaccines produced in the UK to leave the country, his reaction was, why should we? We paid for it. Yes, you should, because there's a need for social contract. I come from the city of Rousseau, Geneva. There's a need for social contract, and I was so pleased when we discussed this with Ada Poonawalla from the SII, or Misela, or Mahima Dattla, my friends from the developing country vaccine manufacturers, they said, we agree with that. Now we are now challenged in Geneva when you have the discussions about the pandemic treaty. There's sadly too little focus on that element, where all of us agree that we need to do better on equity. But the first thing which is discussed there, how can we delay access to pathogens? How can we monetize sharing of pathogens? And if I dare say here in Delhi, now for God's sake, COVID-19 came out of China, and the mere idea, it cost us 20 million lives lost. It cost the world $13,000 trillion in economic loss. And the mere idea that somebody should be paid for sharing pathogens, that's insane. And I hope that we will work on this together, because whether it's your scientists or ours, we need to maintain the access to pathogens which was unhindered. Nobody was ever talking about Nagoya, the ABS protocol during COVID, and we need to maintain that. But that's why I'm so pleased to be here and meet friends again.
Thank you, Thomas. Can I now go to Vignesh, Shivnath? What is that one thing that you think can be done differently the next time, God forbid, we have a pandemic, that you think through your experience you learnt?
So one, if I have to point out, probably one is basically we had a lot of collaboration with the regulators, but it could be enhanced in a way that, if there are any global clinical trials ongoing where India is not a part of the clinical trial, because for the innovator it might not be required, we could go ahead we went ahead with an emergency use authorization approach, but it could also be strengthened by, if there is a need for doing a clinical trial in India, based on the global data of the clinical trial that is available, the medicines can be made available to the patients in parallel to a clinical trial being run in India. There may not be a special need for an Indian company to do a trial on the Indian patients to prove that the drug is efficacious based on the available global data. I'm not saying we should not do it. We should do it, but in parallel to make the drug available to the patients, because especially in case of Molnupiravir that we had partnered with Merck, there was a request to do the clinical trial in India pre-approval. So that probably we spent about 6 to 7 months to finish the whole trial, and then the medicine was made available to the patients post the results of the trial. Though there is an ongoing global clinical trial where the innovator generally tries to take patient population from most of the countries. So we could have made the drug available faster to the patients, about 6 months. So that would be one aspect in which we want, maybe if God forbid there is another pandemic, this would be helpful to make therapies at least available to the patients earlier than much more anticipated.
So I see that in our drugs and cosmetics rules regime, we did not have emergency authorization, even provision, which was just got in for the pandemic. So hopefully that gets changed as the law changes. Number one. Number two, this first in human that lag that we have. I hope that gets in the future gets taken care of, because that is to say that no innovation will come out of India. That is a very fallacious understanding. Something can come for the first time here too. Thank you, Vignesh. Can I now go to Mr. Sood to talk about what is that one thing that you can do differently in case next time pandemic comes in?
Honestly, I don't think solution to the problem of pandemic is one thing per se. But if I have to say that what is the one thing that we need to do differently, I think it's very clear that we need to understand pandemic and change our mindsets globally. And I'll give you an example why. It is said that pandemics, you see once in a century, 70 years or 100 years. Endemics maybe every 2-3 decades, but a pandemic maybe we would see only once in our lifetime. The biggest, and it is also said that whenever there is a pandemic, it takes about 2 years for the world to come out of the pandemic on an average. In this case also, it took almost 2 years.
Yes, it did.
Right? And then another reality is that pandemic doesn't discriminate between developed, underdeveloped countries, white, brown, black, it kills. The problem is that because it kills once in a century, this generation of ours, right, have dealt with it and are not preparing for something that may happen after 70, 80 years. We have vision documents, Vision 2030, Vision 2040, but we don't have Vision 2120. And whenever the pandemic would strike, it is not just the therapeutic partnerships, Thomas, which would kind of be an answer to that. And I think you and organizations like yours have a bigger role to play. His collaboration is needed at every end. And based on the kind of country that you are in, your requirement would be different. So for example, even the developed world during the pandemic faced huge shortages on healthcare facilities, on the beds. Right? So they may need an infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure, which every other countries would need. But maybe a developed country may not need a research or innovation kind of an infrastructure which is already established. Whereas a country in Africa may just need capacities to manufacture.
Right.
Whereas in India, we may not have an issue of capacities, but we definitely have an issue of healthcare infrastructure that needs to be addressed. And also the research and innovation on our own. So for different geographies, there are different issues to be addressed, and there are many issues.
Right.
But they will have to prioritize, and I think public-private partnership, groups like the one that Thomas represents, he goes to various forums. How do you create that one common vision document for the globe? That how do you prepare and address these infrastructure issues to be ready for pandemic? Otherwise, we won't be there for the next pandemic to see what happened.
Who knows?
But with digitization, with artificial intelligence, if next pandemic will also take 2 years to come out of it, then I think we would not have done our job. I think we should come out of a pandemic maybe in 6 months, 7 months time next time it happens. Pandemic is something that we can't prepare in that sense. It is something that we have not known and it comes across. So we will have that. But our response times can improve. So maybe if I have to say is that global surveillance is very critical, Thomas. Right? US announced in January, we announced in March, Africa announced it in October. Within the globe, we had different geographies realizing the criticality of it at a different period. And these are some basic things that needs to be addressed. So if I have to say that one thing that needs to change, it is the mindset. We need to realize collaborations is needed not only in just products manufacturers, it is needed with government, it is needed with healthcare, it is needed with innovator companies, it is needed with community. And how are we building that would be critical. So
I think you talked about surveillance. One of the most effective ones I find is the flu. this whole WHO surveillance each year to come up with like the strain. I think
Yes.
it's wonderful to
Yes.
think in advance and have a vaccine ready.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
and I think with technology advancing so much, I think it is time that there is a concentrated effort, as Rajinder ji mentioned. Everything needs money. You can't create health infrastructure. Everything you need money, and it's high time that developed countries also get the kind of fair share from the global communities to do the work that is needed in the countries like developing and underdeveloped countries.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sudarshan, can I ask?
So basically, I will focus on 3 areas and very, very short. There is a lot of work which is being done at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and there is a professor there, Dr. Chinmay Tampe, and he says he has written a book, The Age of Pandemics. And the point which he is making, there is a lot of work which has been done in war histories, but as far as pandemic is concerned, we tend to forget the next year when the pandemic is over, and we don't record the history, we don't learn from it, and then we get stuck up again and we lose the time. Bill Gates, he's in India, he has referred to the same thing yesterday in his interview in Times of India, that we are not learning what we need to learn. 3 areas, very, very important. Thomas pointed it out in his opening remarks. One is the diversified supply chain. You call it nearshoring, friendshoring, whatever it is. But for the healthcare security of the world and for different nations, we have to create resilient, diversified supply chain. And IGBA, India, we are proponent that US, India and Europe has to come together to play a very important role to create medicine partnership and play a role in creating diversified supply chain. Point number 1. Point number 2 is in therapeutics, we couldn't play much role because the clinical trials, the way it was done. Can we be more rigorous and set up mechanism of clinical trials in other areas for repurposed drug? Because that was the area which didn't do as well as far as pandemic is concerned. And third is power to WTO or some mechanism which exercise balance around the world, because unnecessary restrictions sometimes, the point Rajinder referred, imbalance of investments. So can there be a fund or can there be a mechanism which can be created now and which serves as a fundamental tool to manage the crisis when it happens and play a more equitable role as far as going forward is concerned? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sudharshan. I think we have one more, Rajinder, Suri ji. Can you just talk about what is it that differently one can do the next time round?
Do you want me to talk different, or do you want me to respond to some of
your experiences,
challenges which have been raised? You see, let me first tell you that during pandemic, 3 things came, to the fore. One was the regulatory flexibilities and reliance mechanism, which was, I think, the highlight of the pandemic. And unfortunately, this learning was lost. And we have gone back to the old style of doing traditionally whatever happens. So we are pushing with WHO, with the other regulatory agencies to make sure, at least, because the answer is simple, everything is not emergency. So this is emergency, so naturally exceptional circumstances. The second thing which was there was access to the pathogens. Again, it is not so common now. So this is what we need to really focus on and see that immediate access is granted as soon as the genome sequencing is done. The third thing was at-risk manufacturing. At-risk manufacturing was done by the manufacturers. So they involved, for example, Serum Institute of India made 50 million doses at risk. Even if you say, at that time price was not known, even it was $2, it is $100 million down the drain if it was not approved. So this is something which is important, and therefore what Sudharshan ji was talking about, the funding to be created. Fortunately, and to assure my friend Mr. Sood, a lot of water has flown under the river, under the bridge, I would say, and what it has created is that now INB, there is a global institution, intergovernmental negotiating body. They have had 8 rounds of discussions, and in that pandemic accord is the main product which will come out, and that is basically to take care of all these challenges and issues which have been faced by various countries at different occasions, so free flow of goods, free flow of information, and also creation of pandemic fund, which Sudharshan ji was just talking about. So thanks to government of Indonesia, who under their presidency they took over this particular part, and a $1 billion fund was created. But of course, a lot of efforts are required to really build it up. Again, thanks to G20, last year, Government of India, under their presidency, they have taken several initiatives promoting R&D, promoting vaccine manufacturing, scaling up, scaling out. So this is being done at the highest level of the globe. Not only G20, but G7 took initiatives much earlier and started together. So today the political will is already there, and I think this is what we need to appreciate, that from the industry, if we can support and go forward, collaborate together, and be prepared for any kind of emergency. There is one organization called SEPI, which Thomas referred to. So they have taken a 100 days mission. It took 300 days to bring the vaccine to the fore, from identification of genomic sequence to the vaccine. Now they are saying from 300 we'll bring it down to 100 days. So this requires a Formula 1 race course, that pit and spot kind of a thing. So this is what is being done, and this is practical. I was totally averse to that kind of situation, not possible. But when Richard Hatchett, who is the CEO, when he explained, it became feasible. So I think we all need to think differently, and as Mr. Sood rightly said, mindset. If we are bringing that mindset, we'll be able to deliver together. Thank you.
On that optimistic note, Komal tells me that our time is over, right? Okay. So I think that's a very good optimistic note to end our session. Thank you all the panelists here. I'm sorry that I couldn't open up for some questions. I think they will be available over lunch for you all to talk. Thank you so much. A big hand.
Now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sharma, and the panelist who has just given a fruitful discussions, and we are really benefited out of it.